There's nothing better than grand sci-fi epics in games, and it's because of that it's such a shame we barely have any over multiple decades now, and even fewer that are actually fun and interesting. So when Bethesda first announced that their next big budget title wasn't going to be Fallout or Elder Scrolls, but rather a journey through the Starfield, I was beyond excited. But sadly, almost in a cruel twist of fate, Starfield turned out to be one of the most disappointing games I've ever played. Not because of purely how bad it is, but because of all of the potential and systems that are good, flanked by absolutely horrible decisions and execution. First of all, for a sci-fi universe, Starfield is about as bland as they come. For example, about the most interesting thing you can find out about in the base game is the colony war that took place shortly before your journey begins, which was between the United Colonies and Freestar Collective, two rival factions, which have now found themselves in an awkward truce of sorts. Outside of this, grand mysteries about House Va'ruun along with a dedicated DLC that's yet to come out as of writing this offer more cosmic revelations and questions, but the world of Starfield itself is meant to be very reserved and non-fantastical. With a NASA punk aesthetic, most things are all about form and function rather than exuberance and elegance, and while this does result in some really nice looking interior spaces, the actual feeling behind it all is so bland. On each procedurally generated planet are countless random outposts and dungeons, full of nothing but copy-pasted enemies and layouts with absolutely no interesting story or gameplay to be found. Oftentimes for hours on end, you will spend your time doing nothing more than walking or driving endlessly on a barren and mentally draining rock, only to stumble upon the same exact outposts with the same exact enemies, layout, and terminal entries that you found many light years away just 30 minutes before. And when you do try to engage with the more handcrafted elements like the faction quests, you are met with poorly written segment after poorly written segment, with quests that have objectives that require you to go through 3 loading screens just to turn in a bounty at a terminal for credits, or dialogue choices that are so laughably bad they make me depressed knowing Bethesda could do so much better. I mean, seriously, at one point in my first playthrough, I was tasked with breaking into a top secret facility, and in order to do so, I walked up to one of the guards and asked him to please let me in, and since I passed the dialogue check, he said, "Okay, but please don't tell anyone." This would be funny if it was a one-off comedic quest that was memorable, but when every single quest has this level of lazy writing and non-thought-provoking content, it's exhausting to play for longer periods of time. And yet, the funny thing is, I actually have put way more hours into Starfield than I have most other RPGs I've played, and that's because of the potential. Because you see, sometimes when playing Starfield, everything just hits right. Like when you first land on a new planet and you're met with a dense forest with rays of vibrant sunsets streaming through each leaf, as massive never-before-seen creatures run their way past on the horizon. Or a select few quests that take you into locations full of dark and twisted horrors of a forgotten past, harkening back to the environmental storytelling that made Elder Scrolls and Fallout so great in the first place. But sadly, these moments are far and few between, and the true story of Starfield, at least as it stands as a game before multiple years of updates and its first DLC, is an experience that reaches for the stars but stumbles on the first leg up. For example, systems like crafting, base building, and character progression are all fine, but not in-depth enough on their own to make them truly compelling. Base building doesn't allow you to build specific walls like even Bethesda's previous game Fallout 4 does, only habitats that you must string together like Legos. Crafting has the potential for so much depth and intrigue, but instead is nothing more than 2 or 3 magazine size increases and base damage type changes, all of which essentially are no more interesting than a number on a screen going up. And the upgrade system itself for your character as well has so many nodes and progressions that do nothing more than, for example, a 10% ballistics weapon damage increase. Each and every one of the systems in Starfield, outside of the shipbuilding and dogfighting, which I very much enjoyed, is way too half-baked and underdeveloped. Imagine if the crafting system was even half as good as Fallout 4's, where you could make extremely custom guns with varied effects that change how you play the game. Or what if you could build actually interesting bases that didn't all look like carbon copies of one another? The amount of people online with cool creations like we could see in Minecraft would be awesome. And yet, because the game is so massive, while each system has a great foundation, they each need so much more work to become something that's actually fun to engage with for hundreds of hours. But you know, maybe one day Starfield will actually, after tons of updates, reach its true potential, where every individual system on its own is a grand adventure, and things like the procedural generation will be filled with some top quality custom made quests that can spawn that make exploring the universe actually fun again. The thing is though, what they won't ever be able to fix is the absolute travesty that is the writing in things like the main quest, that has so much potential and yet again drops the ball in every single way. I could go on, and I have in previous videos about how even just the ending of Starfield could have been the greatest ending in a game ever, with some of the coolest revelations and coolest game mechanics possible in a video game, and yet it's extremely dumb, boring, and horribly written. Or in other words, essentially, Starfield is a game that tried to be the best at everything, and instead only accomplished each of its parts to a mediocre and unacceptable level, resulting in something that is frustrating to play as you make your way through systems and quests that all have good ideas or amazing base executions, but are lacking the talent in writing, design, and output in volume to make it more fun. Or in other words, said even better, Starfield is an engine which, if built on top of by an extremely talented group of developers, would be amazing, even with the loading screens and questionable texture work at times. I just hope that Bethesda can prove over time that they're still capable of being that studio, and making this game even half of what the potential it has to be is. In what might come as a shock to all of you, Fallout New Vegas is actually my least favorite Fallout game. Despite the amazing and oftentimes hilarious writing amalgamated with really good quests and memorable moments, I just can't get past how utterly boring the setting is. From the moment you step out into the Mojave wasteland of Nevada, Arizona, and parts of California, you are hit with nothing but long stretches of boring and orange death, splattered with a helping hand of giant flying monsters that stop at nothing to hunt you down. And this means that no matter where you go, no matter how many quests there are, no matter how good the RPG mechanics are in dialogue and combat, all of it falls so flat for me because I simply hate being a part of this world. It really is a great example of how important a setting in a game can be, because even when a game is of top tier quality in all other factors, if the setting isn't something you vibe with, everything else falls away. For example, imagine Fallout New Vegas had the exact same quests, exact same story and missions, but now took place in the newest Barbie game for horses. Immediately, a huge swath of people would ignore the greatness that was finding a cannibalistic tribe of horses in a small town just because they don't like Barbie. And well, that's how I feel about the Mojave Wasteland in Fallout New Vegas. And yet, the reason I don't place it even lower on my list of best RPGs is because it really is so great otherwise that I somehow still manage to find fun playing the game sometimes. The amount of choices and consequences you can make in not only side quests but the main story between the factions, along with the DLCs that add so much needed flavor, even I can't help but see exactly why New Vegas is so beloved. And in many ways, I know there is a side of me that one day might fall in love with this game, maybe even a remaster with some mods, but for now, it just simply isn't my thing, even after trying over and over again for over 10 times now. And it's just another example of one of my very controversial and unpopular RPG gaming opinions. And despite how much I wish I could say I love this game to get easy likes and comments on this video, if I'm being honest, the most beloved Fallout game, for me at least, is also the worst. The world of Fallout is one of the most ubiquitous franchises of all time, spanning across games, television, comic books, and even graphic novels. And as with many people around my age, my first introduction to the series is actually none other than Fallout 3, a game that I both love and hate at the same time. Because I never have had the chance to play the first two isometric titles from Black Isle Studios, Fallout 3 from Bethesda was actually my first introduction to the Fallout universe, and second Bethesda game I ever played. Right off the bat, you're thrust deep into the world and its lore after awakening inside Vault 101 as a child, going through a drawn-out tutorial that sees you growing up inside the underground facility, after which you must eventually escape as all hell breaks loose. And then, in maybe the most recognizable Bethesda walkout moment of all time, you are greeted by the Capital Wasteland, a sprawling death trap consisting of broken down buildings, shredded highways, and death and despair in every direction you look. It's in my opinion the perfect introduction to this dark and gritty world, and sets the tone for what is to come, including multiple vaults with heinous human experimentation and a handful of hidden locations that tell the tale of how humanity fell into such ruin. Because more than anything, what Fallout 3 does right is how it tells a story through nothing more than the environment. Despite how brown and dreary everything is, there's so much history and intrigue behind every corner, and because of that, it's one of the most interesting games to just walk around in and explore. The special system used for leveling up your character includes insane perks like Bloody Mess, which sees your bullets shred enemies into a gory pile of blood as much as possible. And there's seemingly an unlimited amount of all-time great quests, like where you decide whether or not to set off a nuclear bomb sitting in the lonely town of Megaton. And really, more than anything, there is a reason that Fallout 3 is so well loved and adored by Bethesda fans. It came out at a time when the company could seemingly do no wrong and was one of the darlings of the industry. And despite the fact that for most people Fallout New Vegas is considered better, for me, I just thought the environmental storytelling and design of Fallout 3 was superior, in conjunction with writing that is much better than the studio is putting out nowadays, while still being quite a bit worse than what New Vegas could muster. Because at the end of the day, the thing that makes Bethesda games great as RPGs for me is the freedom they give you to explore different environments while you get swept up in the music and ambiance of it all. And in terms of this, Fallout 3 has Fallout New Vegas and its drab demeanor beat. But still, the actual Bethesda formula itself is just one that doesn't speak to me as much as other people, due to the fact that I really crave good writing and quest design in my RPGs on top of an amazingly built world. And yet, Fallout 3 is still a shining example of how to make a post-apocalyptic world interesting to live in and memorable every second you walk through it. Without a doubt, Skyrim is one of the most important RPG releases in the history of the game's medium. With over 60 million copies sold across every platform imaginable, the fifth main installment in the fabled Elder Scrolls series is a juggernaut the size of which almost no games ever get to see. And that's because Skyrim at its core is an experience that truly captures our imaginations. I remember as a kid being so excited for release and spending every waking moment I had watching the trailers and listening to the music. So when I first finally got my hands on the game, I spent every bit of free time I had exploring the snowy landscape and diving into caves to get cool gear. And yet, in just a short amount of time, I somehow got bored and moved on past Skyrim. And ever since then, despite playing the game for hundreds of hours and coming back to it over and over again, with each playthrough, I always have a good time, but not an especially great one. First of all, what the game does amazingly well, without a doubt, is the atmosphere. Simply walking around Whiterun for the first time and hearing a babbling brook nearby as you look out for miles at a foreboding mountain in the distance is an awe-inspiring feeling. And when you finally decide to make your way to the mountain and that iconic music kicks in while a dragon soars above you, there really are so few games that can capture this level of magic from nothing more than just existing in the world. Towns have NPCs that will walk around and talk to you, taverns where you can get quests or listen to bards play music, and no matter what location you set off towards, you are bound to uncover tons of cool random events or quests that will keep you engaged. The problem for me though is that the beauty and genius of Skyrim, for me at least, on release and even more so as I've gotten older and can look back on the game with fresh eyes, stops there. While the actual journey and objectives can be very exhilarating, once you get there, you're usually met with the same copy-pasted dungeons with the same enemies and traps you've seen all game, filled with nothing but slightly better loot that, while looks cool, isn't quite as satisfying as a really well done quest. And when you actually decide to go on many of the more thought-out adventures, you instead are cast into poorly written dialogue and NPCs that often will give you pointless radiant quests that will ask for you to simply kill monsters or get loot, with very little choice and meaningful consequence. Or in other words, while the actual world is beautiful in both presentation and atmosphere, the more you peel back each layer of Skyrim, the less appealing it becomes. The main quest is completely uninteresting, the RPG mechanics, while varied, serve no purpose since you can just keep leveling up and become a jack of all trades, and any single system when put under more scrutiny falls apart. For example, as pointed out by The Closer Look, one of the best YouTube channels of all time, if there's magic in Skyrim that can spawn gold out of thin air, how has the entirety of society and the political systems and financial systems not collapsed? Even though mages could essentially band together to generate their own money printers like the US government, instead the world goes on as normal and all of these powerful magic forces and creatures are unaccounted for. Or in other words, despite how nice it is to actually look at the world of Skyrim and to just exist in it, when you try to do more analysis on its world and politics regarding how people live or how things came to be, well, everything is so shallow, hollow, and unthought-provoking. When compared to many other RPGs I will be analyzing later on this list, list, the world of Skyrim is nothing more than a fun playground with a pretty coat of paint that lacks impact when you have already seen how much better things can be. It's an RPG that absolutely excels to the highest degree down one narrow path, that being exploration, environmental storytelling, and atmosphere, but falls so flat in all others, whether that be floaty combat, lazy writing, boring quest design, or a complete lack of verisimilitude or true immersion that makes the universe feel real and lived in. In essence, Skyrim is an amazing RPG for someone who hasn't played the RPG genre much, or anyone that is trying to get into these types of games for the first time. But if you're a die-hard role-playing game fan, it's very likely that this one doesn't sit anywhere near the top of your list. Because as they always say, looks fade, but deep and thought-provoking writing and RPG mechanics last with you for a lifetime. Fallout 4 is a weird game. On release, many were disappointed to find that the series, once beloved for its dark color tones and themes, was replaced in large part by a more mainstream and less RPG-rich focused approach. Branching dialogue and choices were in large part substituted for more basic speech with voice acting and the ability to build settlements. And really, more than anything, it was just the biggest push yet by the franchise to reach a broader audience outside of just hardcore RPG fans. And yet, despite all of the hate that this game initially got, in recent times, many players and creators alike have come around to all of the things the title did well too. And now, a huge portion of the fanbase even regard it as the best Fallout game out there, myself included. You see, while the writing and quests in New Vegas and even 3 tend to be better on the whole, the actual moment-to-moment gameplay loop of Fallout 4 is far and away the best in the series. For the first time, shooting doesn't feel completely floaty with a lack of punch, and because every little bit of scrap you pick up on the ground can be used for crafting, the entire wasteland itself becomes much more of an interesting playground rather than just a dead and bland canvas. You are able to craft extensive weapon mods and upgrades that all feel impactful and fun, and the map, just like previous titles, is full of interesting places to explore with lots of terminal entries and environmental storytelling. In a way, it's the type of RPG I actually shouldn't like all that much. Usually, I forgive bad gameplay if the story and world is great, and I get bored with games that are nothing more than just a fun loop. But something about that loop in Fallout 4 is just so satisfying. Walking around downtown Boston and sneaking into abandoned buildings and fighting my way through hordes of enemies in order to get all the scraps and loot they have is just so rewarding because I know I can go back to my base that I built personally and upgrade my gear afterwards. And that loop of going back and forth slowly enhancing my character is exactly what makes the game so great. Whereas with most other RPGs I play for the story, world building, and meaningful moments, the setting of Fallout itself is one I don't personally like all that much, which means it's more perfectly suited for me with a survival game-esque approach, where you can turn on hardcore survival mode and it makes every encounter actually fun to play, regardless of the fact that the quests and RPG mechanics themselves are a little more shallow than previous games in the series. And that's not to say there aren't some really interesting quests or companions in this game too, and it actually is just enough that it keeps the entire RPG experience interesting in conjunction with that really good loop that I keep harping on. Or in other words, it solves the main issue I have with Fallout, the setting, and actually uses it in a way where the mechanics the game is built around become much more engaging because trying to survive and build things makes so much sense when you're trapped in a post-apocalyptic playground. So it's not the type of RPG that I think about much after playing, which is what I'm usually going for in RPGs. But despite that, it's still one of my favorite Bethesda games because of how it manages to let us just turn our brains off and have some fun with a simple and effective loop to keep you locked in. Few RPGs in my life have really given me the sense of adventure and awe that my first Bethesda game ever, The Elder Scrolls Oblivion, did. It's a title that excels first and foremost at getting you lost in its world, with dense forests, at the time at least, bustling wildlife, and orchestral genius as unforgettable music and environmental sounds paint your every move. I'll never forget, for example, walking out of the sewers under the Citadel for the first time as a kid and being taken aback by how beautiful the art design and graphics at the time were. And that sense of magic carries over to most other aspects of the experience too. Dungeons, while samey in many ways, can feel like mini adventures exploring into the unknown, especially as you level up in game and unlock more and more powerful armors that feel interesting and open-ended. On top of this too, Oblivion was the Bethesda game that introduced radiant quests for the first time, dynamic day-night cycles with NPCs that will walk around town realistically and work jobs, as well as reacting to you as the player as much as it could. Like for example, how guards will arrest you and always act weird, or how you can sneak up on different people and watch them from afar to figure out when they come home so you can steal things. It isn't perfect, but there's just a strange sense of passion you get playing this game, where you can tell that even for all its shortcomings, like a complete lack of voice actors meaning NPCs have the same exact voice lines and voice, there's just a lot of love behind it all from the developers that oozes from every encounter. And it's not just the feelings either. Quests in Oblivion are miles better than anything in Skyrim or later Fallout games, with super memorable faction quests as well as side adventures like stepping into a demented man's dream and fighting giant spider-human hybrids. It really just comes across as Bethesda firing on all cylinders, especially if you get to play the Shivering Isles DLC, which to this day is some of the best content that Bethesda has ever put out. The thing is though, I know that for Oblivion specifically, a lot of my love for it comes down to nostalgia. It's one of those pillar RPGs that I played as a kid that quite literally defined what kinds of games I came to love as I grew up. And that means even playing nowadays, I get a rush of nostalgia and good feelings of just getting back home after school and soccer practice and playing until my mom forced me to go to bed. But even outside of the nostalgia, Oblivion really does have so many memorable things as an RPG, like the arena and adoring fan, the massive amount of big cities to explore along with hidden wilderness, and even the ability to create whatever character you want while crafting your own spells. And for me, it's just the perfect example of the Bethesda formula done right, where not only is there a grand sense of exploration and wonder at all times, but many of the game's systems and ideas come together flawlessly into a full package, including writing and quests that aren't extremely low quality and lazy like say Starfield. By no means the most complex RPG ever, and in many ways inferior in any one aspect you can think of when compared to other greats, and yet so impactful because of the sense of awe and transfixion it gives you, as the music hits a crescendo as you walk your way through a forest, and the sounds of nature envelop your every being, putting a smile on your face. An RPG that may not have the depth of some of my other favorites, but that nonetheless makes me feel something I wish all the others could.